Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first Third Thursday Web Forum of this year and this decade. How scary is that? Glad you could all join us this morning. My name is Hillary Morris, and as always, I work on user support and communications for both the South Atlantic and the Southeast Conservation Blueprints. And here in the South Atlantic, we've been hosting this Web Forum on the third Thursday of every month at 10 a.m. for years now, and it's intended just to give folks like you a chance to ask questions and provide input to help guide the conservation future of the South Atlantic. So here is our usual agenda for our web forum. I'll start by introducing our speaker, who will talk for 30 to 40 minutes or so about our monthly topic. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion at the end. I'll wrap up by previewing our next webinar so you know what to expect next month, and then wrap up with some staff updates from your South Atlantic Blueprint staff. So I'm going to put us in silent mode so we don't have any background noise today, which means if you need to speak up at any time, you'll just press *6 to unmute your phone line, or you can always pose questions using the chat box, and I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the talk today. Quick reminder, we are recording this web forum, and the slides and the video will be linked from the calendar event on the South Atlantic LCC website within a couple of days. So before I mute everybody, does anybody have a question or comment? All right.
The conference is now in silent mode.
So given our talk today will be Todd Jones-Farrand with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Regan Smyth with NatureServe. They'll be telling us about the Southeast Modeling Pilot Project to develop decision quality species distribution models. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand the presenter power over to you, Regan. And I think Todd is going to get us started with an introduction. Just hit *6 to unmute your line.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to tell you about some work that we are getting started here in the Southeast. This is a project that started back around the 1st of October, and we expect to be doing for the next 2 years or so, depending on how this pilot project goes. So, Regan, if we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I work for the science applications in Fish and Wildlife Service, and a big part of our job in science applications is supporting the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy and the goals within that. You see the vision of the strategy here on the left, and I've highlighted several of the major goals: diverse partners, thriving fish and wildlife populations, and improved quality of life for people. And so we've been working over the past 4 years, and you see version 4 of the Southeast Blueprint, which is our primary product out of our work for CCAS. You can go to the next slide, Regan. So the blueprint is really one of the things I think is great about the blueprint, is that it's a shared learning platform. We can evaluate the potential of conservation actions in the same or similar ways across jurisdictional boundaries. That helps to increase the efficiency of those actions. It helps to increase the transparency of our decisions, and it facilitates knowledge transfer across space from one jurisdiction to another, but also across time from having from one generation to the next of conservationists. And this blueprint is a living spatial plan. As I said, this is version 4.0. The Fish and Wildlife Service in the states have committed to updating this product every year. And that's good because we know it isn't perfect. The blue areas here denote high or medium conservation value, but it doesn't cover all the conservation values yet. There's a lot of biodiversity out there that is not necessarily captured by these blue areas. And we've had to make the case that, hey, the white spaces are not no value, they're just low value. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is add depth to that value. Next slide. And that's what this collaborative modeling project is all about. We're trying to generate a more holistic assessment of the conservation value of Southeast landscape. And we're pursuing that goal by assessing and improving existing models we have for shared species of concern. And as part of this project, we'll be assessing the quality of those models in a structured, transparent way so that the decisions we make on the blueprint are more defensible. So that's kind of the modeling side. On the collaboration side, we're taking a co-production approach. And by that, I mean that we're bringing together the users and the developers to make decisions on what to model, how to model it, which models are good enough, and which ones need improvement. How do we go about that improvement? On the user side, our steering committee is made up of folks in the Fish and Wildlife Service, both from the refuge system and from ecological services. And we also have folks from the state. We have a couple of representatives from the Seattle Wildlife Diversity Committee. On the developer side, we're working with NatureServe to do the modeling. And that doesn't mean that we won't be working with other folks in this process. As I said, we're going to be collecting existing models. So if you know of models out there, we're going to be asking you to help us find those and bring those into the analysis. But we are working with the NatureServe folks because it allows us to leverage the strength and the knowledge of the Heritage Network from across the Southeast and across the country. And in addition, NatureServe and the Heritage Network have built a modeling framework that addresses many of the shortcomings of models and model development processes. So I'm going to hand the presentation over to Regan and let her tell us about that framework. And then I'll come back at the end and tell you more specifics about where we're taking that framework in the Southeast. Okay, Regan?
All right. Thanks, Todd. So I am Regan Smyth. I'm the Director of Spatial Analysis at NatureServe, and I've been kind of intimately involved in our network habitat suitability modeling initiative for quite some time now, and am now working with Todd on extending that into information that can support these efforts of Fish and Wildlife Service and others in the Southeast and elsewhere. So in over the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've been up to over the preceding couple of years and where we see that heading. For those of you who might not be that familiar with NatureServe, we are a biodiversity informatics network, and we work closely with network programs in all the states as well as across the rest of the hemisphere to collect information on at-risk species and ecosystems, what they are, a lot of work on taxonomy and classification, importantly, where things occur, and that's really the question that we're trying to get at with this modeling work, and then how things are doing. So let me talk a little bit about how we've been answering that where is it question to provide the sorts of information that can feed into things like the Southeast Blueprint. Traditionally, and when the Heritage Network was founded, there was this idea that we needed a biological inventory. We needed to know what was out there. And so for 40 years, our member programs have been collecting information like what's shown on this map. Around the edges are a few of the at-risk species that we assess and track, and then those dots on the map are really observations. So element occurrences where we've delineated habitat where these species have been observed. And that, part of the strength of this network is that we bring that information together so that there is sort of this clearinghouse that federal partners and others can access for conservation planning efforts. The information that we've been able to assemble over decades is really powerful, but we know that maps like this don't get us the answers we need for conservation. Every dot on this map represents somewhere where somebody has been and observed a species, but we don't know anything about the blank places on the map, right? We can't survey everywhere. We can't access all the information that's out there, even when surveys have occurred. So with maps like this, you're really missing a big part of the picture. You're really under predicting habitat. And because of that, often for conservation planning or regulatory decision making, we being the, conservation and resource management community writ large, use information like this. So the yellow polygon showing up on this map now is information from Fish and Wildlife Service's ecosystem showing broad ranges for each of these species. While this avoids that problem of what about the blank spaces, it really overpredicts habitat. We know the salamander mussel does not occur in every location across 12 states or whatever showing there. So this information also really falls short for a lot of our needs. And for some species like the Hops azure butterfly, we don't even have this kind of broad range information. So the great news is that, a lot has changed in the last 40 years since the Heritage Network was founded. There's been an explosion of data and an explosion of computing power and an explosion in kind of the science behind predictive modeling. And so today we can offer maps like this. So what you're looking at now has taken those documented occurrences and we've built models of likely habitat for each of these species to kind of find that medium point between, we know it's there, but we don't know where we haven't looked, and it's everywhere. And so I'm going to talk you through how we've gotten to this point and then where we're heading with Todd to make this information even better and relevant to decision making. So the basic way we do this is building predictive models. On the left, the first ingredient to those models is the vetted observation data. So we need information on the ground that we have high confidence in that shows where these species occur. And I'll talk a little bit more of sources of that, but that's our first ingredient in the models. We then intersect that information with various environmental predictors, and this is where in the past 10 years we've really gained the capability to do this because more and more data is becoming available to characterize the environment. So different representations of terrain and climate factors, different land cover factors, soils information, hydrology, all different kinds of information that we can use to characterize what are conditions at that spot where the species occurs like. And then on the far side is kind of the machine learning, the fancy math that we can do with computing to predict out where you have similar conditions on the ground. And what you get out of the other end, this is an example for the frosted flatwood salamander, is a prediction of the probability of suitable habitat at any location on the landscape. So on the left, you're seeing values from 0 to 1, that probability surface. And then we can use both statistical methods and human expertise to threshold that and create those kind of binary habitat, non-habitat maps. So on the right, you're seeing just those areas of highest suitability where you're likely to find the species. And what's great about these outputs, too, is you don't need to just use one threshold. So the yellow is the areas of highest suitability, but here we've set a lower threshold as well to show areas of medium suitability as well. And depending on what your management need is, you might want one or other of these maps. If you're going out to do more inventory, those high suitability areas are really the first places to look. But if you wanted to make a more of a regulatory decision about where somebody needs to survey for the salamander, if they're putting in a road, then something like the pink might be more appropriate. So it's pretty flexible product. And why this is so exciting to us is it allows us to get from what was previously available, those dots of where things have been and those broad maps of where they might be, to something much more precise and really enter the age of precision conservation. And so that comparison is what's up on this slide. What we had before on the left and now these kind of very more confined areas on the right of where we really need to be concerned about this particular species. There's been a lot going on in the past couple years in terms of, the science behind this has really come of age. It's been around in academia for a long time. In the past couple of years, there's been a real push to make that translation of how do you use these sorts of models for management decision making. These are two publications from the last year directly addressing that. The second one there in bioscience is something that scientists at NatureServe worked on with folks at USGS and other federal agencies to really develop a rubric that can help the people on the other end make sense of, is this a model that is of sufficient quality for the types of decision I'm making? This is just a picture of the rubric coming out of that paper. It kind of goes through each of the factors that go into a model, the data you use to build it, how the modeling is done, the products that come out. Do you have metadata you need to really understand what the model tells you, as well as iteration and review, and sets guidelines for, when something is acceptable for use in most contexts, or when something's kind of questionable science that you might want to think more carefully before using. And so both those papers are great resources for people who are interested in how to apply these sort of modeling outputs in decision-making contexts. Because they are just models. They're hypotheses of where species might be, and, the data needs to be treated as such. So the really exciting thing that NatureServe has had going on over the past couple years is a project called the Map of Biodiversity Importance. And this has been a big push nationally to use all that data we've collected over 40-odd years and develop first-generation species distribution models for thousands of species. So we've been working really closely with Esri as well as the Nature Conservancy and support from Microsoft's AI for Earth program to at least do like a first draft model for all these species we have data on, and then use that information to generate maps that can be used in conservation prioritization. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking you through what we've built for that particular initiative and what's coming out of it before turning it back over to Todd to discuss what we're doing next, how we're taking this initiative that came out of the Map of Biodiversity Importance and really working towards those decision quality models that are applicable for use in lots of different contexts. So in the Map of Biodiversity Importance, I mentioned we modeled thousands of species. We focused on the most imperiled species in the United States, as well as species from diverse taxonomic groups. So the project, we developed distribution models or other habitat maps for all globally critically imperiled, and imperiled species, G1 and G2, with NatureServe status ranks, as well as anything that's listed under the Endangered Species Act at the full species level, and including taxonomic groups, all vascular plants, vertebrates, select groups of aquatic invertebrates, including mussels and crayfish, and then select group of pollinators. We did bumblebees and butterflies and skippers. So that's what was included in the project. We started with that 40 years of training data, supplemented with observation data from other sources like USGS's Bison program, and then built a library of environmental predictors to facilitate the modeling across the country. If anyone on the phone has been involved in their own species distribution modeling efforts, you'll know that often what takes the most time in some of these modeling exercises is gathering the data to characterize the environment. And what we've been able to do with the MOBI project is assemble this library of over 150 terrestrial layers and 150 odd aquatic predictor layers that are available seamlessly nationally. And then in certain geographies in Florida and out in California, we have some additional regional predictor layers. But having this assembled allowed us to kind of run this batch process and generate this information for the high number of species included in the project, and is a resource going forward for these kind of modeling initiatives. And then we built kind of this supercomputer environment where spatial analysts from the NatureServe network collaborated together to use that species observation data to together with the environmental predictors and grow what are called random forest models. So random forest is a machine learning algorithm that basically looks at where you have presence points and where you have pseudo-absence points and runs a classification. I'm not going to get into the details of this, but coming out the other side of this, you get a probability surface. Random forest is just one species distribution modeling approach. There's others that we're actively working on expanding our methods to include, but for the map of biodiversity importance, this is what we built. And then coming out the other end of that, we had all our results. I mentioned before that we were modeling thousands of species. This really was a batch process trying to get that first generation of models out there. But we wanted to make sure that those models made some sense. There's a lot you can do on a computer that comes out the other side. It doesn't necessarily make sense when you have a human look at it. So for all the species in the MOBI project, we sought to have one of the species experts in our network review that model. And we did that by building an online model review interface. So we identified experts in each state with knowledge of the species. They could log into this interface, look at the model, give us their comments, rate it as 5-star or 3 stars, like it was a Yelp review, and let us know for that particular species how well were these methods working. And for some species, they didn't work well, and we had to pursue alternative approaches. But based on this information, we were able to do some simple model refinements, but also importantly, capture information for the future about how each of these models could be made better. So maybe somebody tells us, you're missing habitat in this place we know the species is, and I have some data that I could share with you. That could be used in iterating to make this information better and better over time. And so as we look forward to the future, we're really looking for opportunities like this project with Todd to use some of that information we've collected to make those models better and really decision quality. For the MOBI project, we had over 1,900 reviews submitted for 1,500 species. So some species were reviewed by more than one person. The map here is a little bit old, but it's just showing numbers of reviews submitted by state. So we did have a lot of participation in the Southeast. Some of those states that are showing up in gray, we might not have had anyone from state programs submit reviews, but we did have regional experts reviewing some of the species as well. So it was really exciting to see the collaboration that we were able to support with the project and the way that information has kind of, through that collaboration, we've collected this huge amount of information on what species model well, what we need to do to make the models better. So we're really excited about how that worked out, and we're actively working on continuing to refine that collaborative tool to make the experience even better for the people contributing to the project. And so what came out on the other end is what I showed you in the beginning, is those habitat suitability models for each of those individual species. Here's just a selection of them. And when the MOBI project was funded, it really was intended to provide information that could support private lands conservation, was the main impetus behind it. So we were aiming towards using this information to create new hotspot maps to direct people to areas of importance for conservation. So having these first generation of habitat maps, we were able to roll them up into products like this. So taking that butterfly we just saw in the last slide, this is a species richness map for imperiled pollinators. So we're just stacking up, all the habitat maps for all the pollinators included in the project. And you can start to see areas of importance for pollinators in California and Florida and up in the Midwest. We have a similar product for aquatic invertebrates. And again, the Southeast really pops out as you would expect there. But this is especially for some of the invertebrate species and plant species, we really just haven't had the data to make maps like this before. So this provides something we haven't been able to see before in terms of places of importance for conservation of these groups of taxa. Here's our species richness map for imperiled plants, which again, is a pretty, I think, exciting and inspiring map in the Southeast. Vertebrates is here. A lot of those bright colors are because of bats, which aren't necessarily, range limited, but are facing some threats. And then when we put that together, this is our end product for species richness across all the taxonomic groups. And yeah, the Southeast is on fire. So I think there's a lot of ways this information can be used. But species richness alone is, it's just one metric. If we're thinking about areas of conservation importance, taking range size into account for each of these species becomes important. So that's what this map is. It's a range size rarity weighted species richness map, narrowing in on things a little more. And then we have one last map I wanted to show, which is a protection weighted range size rarity map. So this takes into account the degree to which the range for each species is protected, as well as the total range size. So the bright areas are where you have underprotected species with small ranges. So the places that really could use some conservation investment. And this is what we were aiming for. This was the real goal of the Map of Biodiversity Importance Project, is to get to an end product like this that could be made publicly available. We're actively working with Esri to get these data layers up on the Living Atlas within the next 2 weeks. And so all this information will be out there for folks to use. But what's really exciting as well is the information for the individual species that went into these products. And that's what, what we're thinking about as we talk about this project in the Southeast with Todd, is how do we take those individual layers and give them a little bit more scrutiny, give them a little bit more refinement, and come out the other side with data that we have really high confidence in as to likely habitat for the species of greatest management concern. And I want to give just one example before handing it over to Todd again of how this can be so transformative. This is, zooming into Texas. What you're looking on the screen is just planned road construction projects over the next 4 years. So a lot going on with transportation. And when you have road projects, you often have environmental compliance issues. So I'm going to take you through a little sequence showing how these models can be relevant in a context like this. So that's our Texas road project. We're going to zoom into just the Austin area where there's plenty going on. And then let's think about one threatened species occurring in this area, and that's the Jollyville hot-toed salamander, who's a really cool little guy, has lungs on the outside of his body. And what you see in orange up on your screen is the current range for the species from the Fish and Wildlife Service ecosystem. So you look at that range, you look at all those road projects, and you really see a lot of potential conflict. Now I've just added the documented occurrence points for the salamander onto the map. And then we can see what our model looks like that's built from those occurrence points. And a threshold that, so I'm just showing the areas of highest probability, comparing again to the broader range map. And, what we're seeing is that really only a part of that broader area has suitable habitat for this species. And a lot of that conflict starts falling away. Zooming in a little bit more to this one section so you can see that a little bit more clearly. Again, the bright highlighted lines are planned road projects. And, very few of them actually intersect salamander habitat in this context. So some of them do, and those are the areas, where additional consultation or review become really important. So I think this is one example of the ways in which having this more precise data can really streamline our efforts. this is relevant to regulatory compliance, but you can think as well of if you're citing restoration projects or if you want to inventory or otherwise manage for a particular species, how this type of precise information can be so valuable. And with that, I can turn it back over to you, Todd.
All right. Thank you, Regan. So you've just seen kind of the modeling framework that NatureServe has put together in terms of predictors layers, species locations from the Heritage Network, but also from other sources like USGS Bison, which is also coordinated with GBIF, and there's a variety of other things out there that have been pulled in, like iNaturalist. So, and then kind of this framework for generating the models, putting them out there for review, and getting that information back so you can know how to improve that model in the future. So the process that we're doing in the Southeast is kind of take those lessons learned, take those first generation models, and work with our partners to figure out which ones do we need to improve for decision making. A regulatory kind of decision is probably needs the best model we can get as opposed to a project just to go out and survey and see if we can find more of these critters. So we're trying to take that kind of information into account as well. So the process here, we got 7 steps. We're going to identify a subset of species to target, and then we're going to collect all those existing models that we can, MOBI and any other source we can find, run those models against that decision rubric that Regan showed to assess their current quality, decide what's good, what's not good enough, and do a thorough model review. Get more experts looking at those models and getting feedback on them. And then based on that information, the steering committee will select a subset for us to develop further, or select species that we can't find models for yet, and we need to find more. Which species are those? And we'll start modeling those. Throughout all this process, all the models that we collect, we want to assemble into a library and with the metadata about the assessments and put them in one place for folks to find and use. With those models, we'll try and do some assessments that we can then add into the Southeast Blueprint and provide some other guidance and case studies for our partners, for the conservation community in the Southeast. Next. So we are, like I said in the beginning, we started this project in October, so we're really we're in the midst of those first 2 steps. The first one was selecting target species. As I said, our steering committee is made up of folks from the refuge system, the ecological services of Fish and Wildlife Service, and the states, who just recently put out a regional list of species of conservation need. So we took 3 lists of species and we looked for the intersect for those. What species are on all 3 lists? That first cut got us 87 critters of a variety of taxa, but the state regional list did not look at plants, and plants are, of course, a big part of the listing work that we are doing in the Southeast. So we looked at what was common between the trust list and the at-risk work plan. So stuff inside that red circle in that Venn diagram. We added 46 plants for a total of 133 species. That's a little much to tackle in 1 year, so we narrowed that down, and currently we're thinking about 34. That number may change a little bit, but these are primarily species that have listing decisions in fiscal year 21 or 22, so we can inform those decisions, or they have some high concern for the refuge system or the states. And you can see here in these tables kind of the distribution of species across that list in terms of taxonomy and geography. We've got a pretty wide spread across the states in the Southeast Association. Next. And so once we have those, we're going to be collecting whatever data we can find, whatever models we can find. Here's 2 examples Edison's Skyrum, I guess. And that's a plant that the service is doing, making a listing decision on in fiscal year 21, so coming up here real soon. But it's also a species that has some action urgency because of declining habitat. On the right, you have the Escambia map turtle. That's a species that we're not making a decision on until fiscal year 28, but it's a high species of concern for the service and for the states, and it's another one with high action urgency because of collection threat. These two species already have MOBI models, and we have reviews for those. As we run the plant through the decision matrix, we might find that, this is good enough for what we need, and we can go ahead and give that to the Fish and Wildlife Service folks that are doing the species status assessment for that species and help them use that model. On the map turtle side, we got some, Midland reviews on that one. We probably need some additional refinement. We'll use the reviews. We'll also use that decision quality rubric to think about, okay, how could we develop a better model for this species? And given that it's that far down the line, that might include some surveys. It might just include getting data sets from folks that have been doing surveys for this, but wasn't included in the original model. Next. So that's kind of where we're going with this project. We're going to take those 34 species. No, that's okay. We're going to take those 34 species and kind of run them through the decision rubric. We're going to be looking for folks to review those species. We're going to be looking for folks to give us information on existing models or any data that they might have on those species. So we're going to be looking to you all and to the broader conservation community for help in that endeavor. We expect to have the species list for year one written in stone here in the next couple weeks. So we'll be putting that out so you know specifically what species we're after. But there's no need to wait. If you know that you have some species models that are on the at-risk work plan, on the regional species of greatest conservation need list, or otherwise are federal trust species, those things that are on ESA, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, or interjurisdictional fishes. If you have data or range-wide models for those species, let us know about it. You can contact me directly, or you can contact Regan, and we'll get your information into the mix. And with that, I think we've covered all we want to cover today, and we can open it up for question and answer.
Great. Thank you so much, Regan and Todd. That's a really interesting project. Excited to see where it goes. I would say we have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So what I'm going to do is open up the phone lines so that we're in talk mode and can speak more freely. And I'll just ask that everyone please really be mindful of the mute button on their phone so we don't get a lot of background noise.
The conference is now in talk mode.
All right, so now anyone who wants to speak up with a question, just feel free to jump right in, or you can use the chat box.
I'm sorry. Hey, this is Ann Chazelle at Virginia.
Hey, Ann.
Nice work. I was wondering, so you're making the models with the probability surface. How do you get to a decision quality threshold? How are you going to try to tackle that?
So the rubric that was put out in the Soper et al. Paper kind of gives a red, yellow, green. It gives you criteria for what is red, what is yellow, what is green for a bunch of different elements related to the modeling process, to the models themselves, to the data. So we'll be comparing it against that. One thing that we thought originally was that we were going to kind of subset that and say, okay, these are the criteria and the colors that are required, or is the minimum minimum standard if you're going to go do a survey. Here's the minimum standard if you're going to go make a decision with that, like a regulatory kind of decision with that. But talking with the steering committee, it's not that clean cut. And so we're still going to be working through that kind of minimum standards idea with the modeling team, as well as with the steering committee and with the Heritage Network as a whole. Do you have any other comments on that, Regan?
No, I mean, other than, the thresholds, one of the great things about the probability surface is that flexibility depending on what you're using the end product for, but it does make it hard to say, is this aligned for habitat or non-habitat? And one thing we are trying to do, I actually had a call about yesterday, is to build into the model review tool an opportunity for reviewers to play with the thresholds and see, what seems to be capturing the habitat that's from their perspective. How to bring that information all together in the end to decide on, where you want to set that, I think is something we'll need to work on as the process continues.
Yeah, and I will also chime in on that and say that on the threshold question and on the decision quality question, that all of this is meant to be iterative. So the first models we put out there may not be the best, and but we're hoping that folks are going to use them. There's going to be some feedback loops about those uses that we can then use to improve those models. And as we get more trust in the models, we'll have a better idea of where to set those thresholds for those, especially more, higher uses like regulatory kinds of uses.
Well, just to, for sake of discussion, I worked when we did the Region 5 maps, so working with Northeast for Fish and Wildlife Service. There were just a lot of discussions about what threshold to use for the model, and each state representative had their own idea of what they wanted to use, and so when it came to how is the region going to apply it, it was very difficult. So I guess maybe I'm just suggesting to be alert that if you're trying to do something regionally, it may be very difficult, or there may need to be some sort of guidance already set forth once these start coming out for how an individual state field office might be using it.
Okay. That's good.
I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to talk with y'all more about that if you need to.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to learn from your experience, so it would be useful to talk further.
Great. Well, good question, good recommendation, and thanks for speaking up there. Does anybody else have a question or a comment?
Hey, this is Brian Crawford from UGA.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, Regan and Todd, thanks for the presentation. Kind of jumping off that question, thinking about regionality of these things. I was looking at some of the wide-ranging species you talked about, and Todd kind of knows a little bit about, how we used experts in our work to account for how good habitat might not be the same across these wide-ranging species. So I was wondering if you've incorporated that into some of these models using just the different ways, I guess, that you used expert opinion. I'd be interested in hearing about specifically with that sort of regionality to the model.
Yeah, so for the Map of Biodiversity Importance Project, it really was a bit of a quick and dirty batch processing exercise. So we did that initial screen of experts of, does this make sense, yes or no? But for 2,000 species, we really weren't able to go into that depth of refinement, which is why we're so excited about these follow-up projects. And I think where we do have an opportunity to get more into that. I don't know, Todd, if you have anything to say there.
Yeah, it's a topic that we are going to have to tackle at some point, but we're a little too early in this process. I think we will rely heavily on the reviewers and the species experts, just as you have, Brian, to kind of elucidate that that piece of it. And, you know, we might have some models where we model it differently in each region and then summarize that up and think about things like quail. Quail's not on the list, but there's a species that does a lot of different things across its range, and it might we might be having to take that kind of piecemeal approach, but then add it up to an overall map that range-wide the partners can agree on.
And I will say that is one of our kind of lessons learned from some of our region on Moby is for many of the species, we did kind of come to that conclusion across the other side, but particularly for species with, you know, kind of disjunct populations, but in a lot of contexts, sometimes there's something to be gained for modeling things together, but often to get to that end kind of decision quality thing you want to use in a particular geography, it can make sense to kind of break things apart and get a model that works in a particular area.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, tackling it the way you guys did with the workload you had. I'd be interested to see in the second round, you know, adding regional, like allowing like good habitat to differ from place to place and region to region. Might improve the models, but it also, you know, might make people trust the models a little more.
Well, right.
So that'll be really interesting to see and sort of how this, if you use that for certain species that are pretty wide ranging, like if it'll improve model fit, but it also might, you know, help people have confidence in the models and use them in their region.
And as a rule, you know, the wide ranging things are a lot trickier. And I think within the Map of Biodiversity Importance Project, you know, we have the highest confidence in a lot of the really narrow endemics are kind of things that easily model well. And it does take a lot more work for some of those wider ranging things often. So it's a really good point.
Well, thank you, and good work.
Thanks, Brian.
We should have time for one or two more. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Hello, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes, hi, this is Elizabeth Martin. I have a quick question. When you, when you develop and you provide the models online, are you planning to make available like the history of like the quality and all those kind of things for each model, just to give, I guess, the users, you know, certain level of confidence, or so that they can make a decision as to whether they take them as they are or that kind of stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we had built into that review tool was trying to pull it up on my screen. I don't think I'm going to be able to, but kind of an extensive metadata document to go along with each model that explains the data that went into it, which variables are driving the results you see, some statistical measures of how well it's performed, as well as an evaluation against that rubric. So kind of spelling out, on the species data that went into it for a lot of the Map of Biodiversity Importance models, it was a first type, because of the scope of that project, they had to use whatever was readily available. And so we know we could do better in mining additional data sets. So we worked pretty hard on that first project to assemble information that can help users understand the results. And then I think as we go ahead with this effort with Todd in the Southeast, we can go even further there.
That's a good question, and building on that, the data that is going to be made publicly available, is that all downloadable? That's not just like see in a viewer.
Yeah, what's going to be publicly available and downloadable is that kind of building up that series of pretty colorful maps they showed you at the end there. So the roll-up of species richness, range size rarity, and protection weighted range size rarity for groups of species. The individual species models coming out of the project are not going to be made publicly available, both because there's data sensitivity issues with releasing those, and we don't want to point everybody to where our map journal is. And then also because they really are first generation models, and there can be a distrust of some of these modeling products. Particularly, what we generated for Moby is not necessarily decision quality at this point. So we want to make that clear in how we communicate what those are. We will be making that metadata I talked about that we developed for each model available to them. And they will, the rolled up products will all be downloadable and accessible.
Yeah, so Regan, for clarity, Regan's talking specifically about the MOBI project and those models. What will come out of the Southeast model, we expect that the models we finish and everybody's kind of signed off on, we will be able to release those individual models with the metadata. We will not be releasing the data points that fed them, because in many cases that's proprietary to the Heritage Network. Or we can point to the data sets we got off of iNaturalist or Bison or someplace else that are publicly available. But for some of the members of the Heritage Network, those data are proprietary and protected, and we won't be putting those out for download. But the models and all the metadata that went with them will be available. And if somebody has a legitimate reason to test that model or recreate it for some reason, we can work with the network to get them the input data and let them do that.
Great, thanks. I'm going to take one more really quick question, if there's anybody else that wants to jump in. All right, I'm not hearing any, so for now what I'm going to do is just take back the presenter power and conclude with a few slides previewing next month's web forum and giving some quick updates from South Atlantic staff. I will pause again for questions before we hang up today, so if something occurs to you in the next couple minutes, just hang on to it and we will have time. So next month, I wanted to give you a sense of the upcoming web forum. It's going to be February 20th, same time, same connection information as today. And I think this is another one that's going to be pretty broadly interesting to anyone in the Southeast, even beyond just the South Atlantic geography. This is going to be a presentation by Catherine Jewell with NC State University. She's with the Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology Department. And she has been interviewing the directors and board members of state wildlife agencies across the Southeast to help gauge how they view the evolution of wildlife conservation challenges across our region. What have the past challenges been? What are our current challenges now? And how do they think that we should best respond to them? So she has some interesting preliminary results already that suggest, perhaps unsurprisingly, that insufficient funding was viewed as the primary conservation challenge across our region, both past and present. So she has some really interesting perspectives to share from state wildlife conservation agencies, and I think this is going to be a great talk. She gave a talk on this at CIAFWA that was really well attended, and I'm really excited to hear more about this project. So now I'm going to move on to a quick update from Rua about a South Atlantic Conservation Blueprint update that we are working on for this year. So Rua?
Hey everybody. So basically, Todd already mentioned the Southeast Conservation Blueprint and the South Atlantic Blueprint into that. So we're working on an update to the South Atlantic that we plan to have in time for finished in August, in time to update the Southeast Blueprint. So the plan is we've been working hard on a bunch of improvements. Hopefully we'll have some indicator updates finished by February. Might loop in some of you folks on that. And then we're hoping to have a draft of the next version of the South Atlantic Blueprint up in June or July for y'all to start taking a look at.
Thanks. So as a reminder, the South Atlantic Blueprint is one of the inputs to the Southeast Conservation Blueprint that covers parts of 6 states here in the South Atlantic. All right, so with that, I'm going to pause one more time for questions. I do want to let everybody know how to get involved in the South Atlantic Blueprint. I know we promoted this web forum in the new CCAS newsletter, and so in case we do have some folks who aren't aware, this is a monthly web forum event. Sorry, people are off mute now. Please be careful to mute your line, y'all, if you're still on the phone.
I know, that's right.
So I would encourage you, if you want to get a monthly reminder email about this web forum, you can join the South Atlantic LCC web community at southatlanticlcc.org. I definitely encourage you to reach out to your South Atlantic Blueprint staff, but that's me and Louise and Rua and Amy and Mallory and Janet here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And of course, you can explore the Conservation Blueprint online and reach out to us if you need any help. So with that, I'm going to pause again for questions. Does anybody else have questions for me or for Regan or for Todd? All right, sorry about the background noise, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I'll let you go 2 minutes early. I really hope that you join us again in February, and have a fabulous rest of your week.